All right, guys, hello. I think that we need to cover a basic concept of what the purpose of philosophy is over again and how ontological mathematics satisfies the basic purpose and the basic goal of all philosophy, and even including all science too, obviously, as a subset of philosophy. As you know, in some of the recent videos, it's obvious that sensing types struggle with this, so I'm not sure if this will make any difference to them again, but let's go over it again because it's a pretty fun discussion. So, ontological mathematics and the theory of everything. What is the main task of philosophy, and how does ontological mathematics achieve that and satisfy that after all of these thousands of years? Yes, indeed. How wonderful, right? So, of course, this is all based upon the Philosophical Idealist Treatise by Mike Hockney et al. So what is the main task of philosophy? Would anybody say it? Can anybody state it? What do you think it is? I mean, of course, people can put this in their own terms and might have their own sort of perspectives, but, you know, from my perspective of wanting to understand existence and why I'm here, I think that's really the purpose of philosophy, isn't it? Isn't that what all knowledge really reduces to? We're wondering why we're here and why existence exists. Well, so what is the main task of philosophy? To answer why existence exists. And also, as a corollary, we would expect or hope or possibly find what our role or place is in it. So what we're going to focus on is not our place in it in this video, but why it exists in the first place. That's what we want to know. Why does existence exist at all? Why something rather than nothing? So the problem is here, this is the key. This is what this video is really about. This is key. This is what the two main pitfalls are in answering this question, which have been known pretty much since antiquity. You have Zeno and his paradoxes, basically addressing one aspect of the problem of philosophy, and Plato in his cave addressed the other aspect of the problem of philosophy. So specifically, it comes down to two things, two major problems in philosophy. We must avoid two things. So the two deaths, as I call them. So the two main tasks of a philosophy is to avoid one, infinite regress. So with infinite regress, that is, what you find with scientific materialism and their randomness. Basically, well, that's actually how they try to avoid infinite regresses with randomness, right? They just say, well, it's random. But of course, that's no explanation because there's no justification for why it should be random or why existence should be random or where the randomness comes from in the first place and what its own properties are, what its ontology is, a justification. It's simply assumed by the materialists, right? So we want to avoid infinite regress. And of course, infinite regress also relates to just saying, well, God created existence, because then you have that regression problem of asking, well, what created that God? So that's immediately an infinite regression problem. So infinite regression is highly related to the appeal to the mystical or the unknown. These are two very highly related aspects. They're almost the same thing. And so that's what you have with God, with religion, and then of course randomness is basically scientific materialism's mystical unknown, right? That they appeal to. That's basically their God, right? Whereas the Abrahamists, the typical traditionally religious, appeal to God, which they cannot explain and have no justification for. The scientists, the scientific materialists, simply appeal to randomness as if that's an answer, but it is of course just as little or at least or lacking in answer or substance as just saying God did it, So anyway, that in any case, that's how you can see that infinite regress and appeal to the mystical unknown are really quite related here. Okay, so infinite regress. So the eternal nature of existence, which is indeed an infinite regress. So if existence is eternal, and I'll get into this in a few slides here in a moment, but just considering that nature or that existence is eternal, then that would indeed be a form of infinite regress because it's always existed, right? But we can finitize that. The goal or the task is to finitize that in a sufficient reason for why it would be so and not otherwise. That's what finitizes infinite regress. That's what finitizes it and says, oh, that is why, gives you a reason which says this is why it has to be this way and not any other way. Okay? So you have to finitize infinite regress with a sufficient reason for why it is so and not otherwise. It closes the loop, and it closes the mystical nature of it. It closes the mystical, unknowable nature of it. That's key, right? So solving that problem, however, immediately leads one to the appeal to the mystical. Finitizing infinite regress requires one to therefore explain or justify an existence which precedes or stands outside of the material domain universe. And typically, God has been the answer for that. Kant, in more recent times, that's Kant's unknowable noumenon domain, the noumenal domain, which he said was unknowable, and which he quite openly said gave his philosophy room for faith, and this was his attempt to refute reason, so that he could get away from reason and simply justify having faith in the mystical again, right? He couldn't. The problem was that Kant couldn't figure out how to finitize the problem, right? So in the end, Kant just said, well, I have to leave room for faith then, because I don't know how to finitize the mystical. I don't know how to finitize the problem of infinite regress. He couldn't do it. So that's why he just came up with this attack on pure reason and then said I had to leave room for faith. So poor Kant couldn't figure it out. Scientific materialism's randomness, of course, is a new modern answer for that. Randomness is what stands outside of existence and creates a universe, randomly for no purpose, for no reason, by no mechanism. It's just magically happens. Wow, how mystical, right? That's literally how scientists are. They have mystical, sort of religious, Abrahamic minds on the matter when it comes to the matter of existence, and why existence, and they come up with silly ideas. Oh, well, existence is a multiverse, and that's the answer. It's like, no, coming up with the idea of the multiverse is not the answer to existence, because all those other multiverses, if that's true, constitute what existence is. The question is, why does any of all of that exist at all whatsoever from step one, from the ground basis? That's the question, okay? Just saying it's random, it's because they came up with that random answer first, many decades ago. And then, a few astute philosophers said, well, randomness isn't really an answer. And then the scientific materialist response was, oh, it's an infinite number of universes. There we go. There's your answer. It's an infinite number of universes. Now do you feel satisfied? And then a lot of these idiot philosophers were satisfied. It's like, that wasn't an answer. It was no better of an answer. You just made the problem of existence worse with an infinite number of universes. You just made the problem worse. And anyway, you didn't even approach it. You have to explain why existence exists at all. Why should there be an infinite number of universes, even if that did exist, which I'm pretty sure it doesn't. So Schopenhauer had his idea of this will, this striving will, although he never really explained why that should be. You have Hegel and his dialectical becoming and his being and all that. Of course, Hegel is quite an excellent philosopher. But none of these explain why these exist, why they exist, or why they should be so as they are. So, principle of sufficient reason. So, firstly, existence cannot simply have popped into manifestation at some point, because that would be mystical, because there's no possible reason for why that would be so, unless one appeals to a god. But then that smacks into an infinite regress, because if you appeal to a god, then you say, but what created that god? And then if you try to answer that, the next question would be, well, what created that god that created God? You see? So you see how the infinite regress and the mystical are really the same problem. They are effectively the same problem, the infinite regress and the mystical, right? So existence cannot simply have popped into manifestation at some point. You go from complete non-existence to existence. That wouldn't make sense. There's no reason for that. It would be a permanent mystery. And of course, that's why scientific materialists, want to keep the mystery, because for them, existence starts with the universe. For them, existence in and of itself starts at the Big Bang. That's all of the start of existence, right? Okay, so thus, to avoid the mystical and the related infinite regress, existence must be eternal and have a reason for why it is so. All right? Existence must be eternal and have a reason for why it is so. If existence wasn't eternal, if existence simply came into being at some point, that would be the ultimate mystery, which you could never answer for why that should happen then and in the way that it did, right? So the scientific materialist idea that this universe constitutes the beginning of existence is wrong. This universe does not constitute the beginning of existence. There must have been something pre-existent or outside of this current material universe, which explains why this current material universe could exist. All right, so ontological mathematics for the win. It solves the problem of infinite regress and the appeal to the mystical at the same time, as is, of course, necessary. So existence must be nothing. Here it is. Here's your answer. Okay? Existence must be nothing. I think that's thunder. Existence must be nothing, since nothing is required to create nothing. This is key. Okay? Nothing is the only self-existent which does not need to appeal to something outside of itself to justify existence. There's no barrier to nothing. There's no agent required to make nothing. Nothing is the only thing that can be self-existent. It's the only thing that exists with its own justification, because it requires nothing outside of itself to exist. That is how you stop infinite regress, and it's also how you stop it being mystical. We just answered it. We have just answered existence, and we've got around infinite regress, and relatedly, at the same time, we've got around it being a mystery, a mystical mystery that we can't explain. We have now explained it by it being nothing, because nothing requires nothing outside of itself, which would be the mystical and infinite regress aspect. So without needing to appeal to something outside of itself, you've therefore abolished those problems of infinite regress and the related mystical nature of it, right? So nothing is the only self-existent which does not need to appeal to something outside of itself to justify its existence. There's no barrier, no agent required to make it. So with that done, then how to explain something? And of course, this previous state, this state of nothing, the self-existent, it's eternal. Of course, it has always been as such. There's no point at which it could have changed form. It has simply always been as such for this reason. So now it's understandable. It's become finite. Even though it's infinite, it's become finite. We've developed the ability to understand it. Why it is so, even though it's infinite. We've finitized the understanding of it. So with that done, how to explain something? Something must also be nothing. That's crucial. That is simply what you're forced into. You simply have to accept that logic. That is the only possible logic. What we perceive as something must be nothing in some way. Now, be careful here, because I've had a few people comment about this. This does not mean in the nihilist sense that it's all nothing, it's all illusory, nothing, and it's meaningless. That's not what this means. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking simply about in the logical sense. Simply in the purely logical sense. Okay? That's it. Just in logic. We're not talking about meaning. We're not talking about personal meaning or your emotions about it. Okay? We're simply talking about in pure logic. Okay? That's it. So not in the nihilist sense, but simply in the logical sense. That something is nothing. Something is net nothing. Okay? So it is certainly well-founded and meaningful nothing, right? So nothing, in effect, becomes the creator of something. So that problem where you appeal to something to be the creator of something, well, it's nothing, right? But nothing, is the self-existent, and something is simply nothing, a form of nothing. So because logically, any type of nothing has to be self-existent, right? So nothing is self-existent. Nothing is the only thing that can be self-existent, because it's the only thing that doesn't appeal outside of itself to justify itself. Well, then that would mean that any type of nothing has that property, that it can be self-existent, that it is self-existent. If it can be, then it is, and it's always been. There's no point in the past at which it decided it was so. It has simply always been so. Okay? Nothing can exist as something which reduces to nothing, net nothing. So that's one type of nothing. Nothing can exist as something which reduces to nothing, to net nothing. So now, because this is the realm of pure, perfect, 100% precise idealist logic, then the only structure which can exist as something reducing to nothing is the adamantine perfection of mathematics and mathematical balance. How? About zero. What does mathematical balance about zero look like to you in your mind? If I read those words to you, now, of course, if you're a sensing type, as we've discussed in previous videos, the sensing type can't form a picture in their mind of what it means. They simply can't do it. But I hope you can. So if we introduce the concept of a perfect mathematical structure that perfectly balances mathematically around zero, what is that structure? What is it? What would that look like? What would something look like that is perfectly centered on zero? That's the circle. That's the circle, right? That's the only thing. It's the only thing it can be. So it's the circling, which is base energy. Of course, in a previous video, we discussed why it moves, a point of moving around a circle. So this is and manifests as the circling, which is base energy. And now we have a rational explanation for what base energy should be. You know, base energy as the photon, why it has the properties that it does, why it has two components, you know, representing the sort of real and imaginary numbers. And the two waves, cosine and sine wave, as the two aspects of the circle going around the circle. Right, great. So that's base energy. So your place in it. So lastly, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but your place in it, since that is sort of the corollary question or thing we want to extend to. Once we understand what existence is, then we should certainly understand what we are in it. So if one instance of a net nothing circle can exist, then why should an infinite number of them exist? And of course, the instances are different circle sizes or different frequencies, right? Because a circle obviously has a size and the point going around it has a speed at which goes around it. So if it can go around at one speed, why can't it go around at any possible arbitrary speed? And so that's what, or size, circle size, in fact. And so the different circle sizes are what create the different frequencies, okay? So if one instance of all frequencies can exist, then an infinite number of these can exist too. And so these instances of sets of circlings are called monads, okay? And monads are us. That's what we are. And if you want to have a listen to a song, which kind of gets to the point, listen to You're a Zero by the Yeah Yeah Yeahs. I really like that song. I was just rocking out to it before making this video. You're a Zero, Yeah Yeah Yeahs. Go listen to it. It's a great song. Anyway, so I hope that helped. I hope that sort of got the idea of the two main problems of philosophy. What does philosophy need to avoid? The problems that philosophy has had to solve pretty much since antiquity are the problems of infinite regress and appealing to the mystical. That's always been the problem. I mean, hasn't it? I mean, basically, if you look at what, not that I have done a lot of looking, but, you know, Mike Hockney does do a very, very good job of trying to educate you on what the intellectual tradition is and what all of the past philosophers have said. He does do a very good job at trying to get you up to speed on all that. Basically, what's the problem? What is the problem that all philosophers have been struggling with? Well, how do you avoid infinite regress? And if you're going to avoid it or stop it by appealing to God, how do you do that in a way that's just not mystical and, you know, magical sounding and in a mystery that you can never understand? Of course, you know, many philosophers and religious people are happy to stop there, and scientists now stop there with randomness and inexplicability and whatnot. But anyway, that's the problem of philosophy. How to stop infinite regress, how to not to appeal to the mystical in explaining existence. And so ontological mathematics can do that. It's really not that big a deal. I don't know why people get so mad about it. I can understand religious people getting mad about it because you're kind of explaining their God. But the scientific materialist, they're very upset. They get really upset about explaining existence. Religious people don't get too upset about this stuff, about ontological mathematics. But the scientific materialists really get upset about it, and I don't know why, because it's just an idea. Like, don't you understand the problem? We're just trying to explain why existence exists. We're just trying to avoid the problem of infinite regress, and we're trying to avoid the problem of, you know, appealing to a mystical God that you can't understand. That's not a big deal. You know, and we can do that. We can do that now, and we can even do it with math and show how it's mathematical. And then once you do that, you have a justification for why existence should manifest mathematically, should manifest mathematical properties in it. Now it makes sense. Now we can explain Eugene Wigner and his miracle of mathematics. Now it's all totally consistent. What's wrong with that? I don't know why it makes scientific materialists so mad, so angry. It's not a big deal. It seems pretty consistent. It seems pretty tight. It seems like a pretty tight argument, you know, so what's wrong with that? and it's using math. And now we can explain why science works. Now we can explain why empirical science works instead of thinking that empirical science is a miracle, that it works with math. What's to be upset about that? Like I said, I can understand why religious people might be upset about it, because we're sort of denying them their God, depriving them of their God. But why does a scientific materialist need to be so upset about it? We're not depriving them of anything. Well, it seems we are depriving them of the mystical, which they call randomness or infinite universes. That's simply their alternative form of the mystical, but it is no doubt, nonetheless, quite mystical. And they, in fact, have a deep religious emotional connection to these concepts of inexplicable randomness and inexplicable infinite universes. They do, in fact. And so now that they're meeting for the first time in their history, ontological mathematics, which can explain away their randomness and their infinite universe as well. This is just like when this was done with the religious people in the medieval times, and you're looking at how upset the religious people came. At least scientific materialists aren't literally burning anyone at the stake. They just do it through, peer review. Okay, well, hope that was fun. Take care. Bye.